Okay, let's go ahead and get started.
All right.
All right, if you could say your name and where you're based and what you do.
Okay. I'm Max Krochmal. I'm based in New Orleans. I'm a professor of history and director of the Justice Studies program at the University of New Orleans.
Fantastic. So Texas has a hidden history of multiracial working class organizing that might surprise people. Tell us some key moments in that history that you think is important for people to know.
Sure. Welcome to my TED talk I just gave. So yeah, there is a history there. I mean, first off, there's a history of union organizing in Texas and across the South that we often discount, and also of civil rights organizing that goes way back before the 1960s. And in Texas, these were very much intertwined. Um, Both a Black freedom struggle and a Mexican American civil rights movement had close ties to working people, or were rooted in working people, and had moments in which labor unions played a critical role in their organizing. So there's different moments I could speak about, but I think the most important is when they come together in the 1960s in something that they call the Democratic Coalition, and this is composed of Mexican American community organizers, political activists, union people, African Americans in all those same categories, the predominantly white Texas AFL-CIO, and then a group of white independent liberals, as they called themselves, that engaged in political action kind of at the community level. And all these different groups, spent decades organizing on their own and fighting sort of separate struggles against Jim Crow and Juan Crow and the Brown and Root Company and some of the other big contractors that were pushing for an open shop. And of course, the conservative Dixiecrat leaders of Texas. But over the course of like the 1950s in particular, they started getting closer as they experimented with talking to one another, and were forced together in self-defense. And so they then built a political alliance that was both doing work of registering and turning out voters, so fighting at the polls, but also working together in the streets.
What, in your view, were some of the accomplishments of that period in that organizing?
Yeah, well, I think each moment along the way, and I didn't maybe talk about specific strikes, but I write in my book about the 1938 pecan sheller uprising in San Antonio, which also had a multiracial coalition around it, and that led to the election of Maureen Maverick as a left-leaning liberal mayor of San Antonio. So that's one moment. And so you can see there's like direct accomplishments there. Sometimes they're then reversed. The coalition in an early form wasn't quite fully clicking yet, but they elected Ralph Yarborough to the United States Senate. And then, in the 1960s, coalition organizers, or people who later joined this coalition or helped to build it, people like G.J. Sutton of San Antonio, or I write about a railroad worker named Moses Leroy of Houston. They were very much involved in the sit-in movement, in integrating their cities. They connected those youth-led movements with Black labor unions like the ILA, the Longshoremen's Union. And those unions provided critical support, like bailing people out of jail when they got arrested doing sit-ins. So really important stuff, and leading rallies where they'd be let out of jail, or providing funds through fundraisers for civil rights groups. And then the big picture, right, is by the mid 1960s, this organization had led a major push to eliminate the poll tax in Texas. They're not successful immediately locally, but the organizing that they do means that when the poll tax is repealed at the federal level, they're able to swing into action, and had already been doing get out the vote work. They did a tremendous amount of leadership development. They built a block worker program with some 10,000 volunteers involved all over the state. And so once you do that political education and that capacity building, you can't put the genie back in the lamp. And those people, then went on to win election to the state legislature, to local city councils and county commissions. And they really, completely transformed the politics of Texas. They ended the worst of Jim Crow segregation and of Juan Crow segregation. And they turned the cities blue eventually, right? They made this map where we have an archipelago of blue cities surrounded by the red countryside. They broke open the Democratic Party. They broke down the doors of the Democratic Party that didn't want them, and they transformed it into an organization that was multiracial and committed to both labor and civil rights.
What happened to these efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. there's different things that happened. I mean, in the mid 1960s in Texas and everywhere, we begin to see some of the limitations of the civil rights movements, both the Black freedom struggle and the sort of longer Mexican American civil rights movement. Um, Sort of the push for integration and for inclusion within the framework of liberal politics in America was proving inadequate for those communities. And people began searching for other ways to organize. And what that took shape as was another round of youth-led organizing, the Chicano movement, the Black Power movement, a new wave of organizing within unions, kind of inspired by those radical movements, as well as the anti-war left as it became more and more radical over the years. Um, but what they exposed was that the sort of liberal integrationism that Lyndon Johnson advocated by the end of his political career, the promise that if they just did their part, they could get their piece of the pie in America, wasn't true, and it wasn't true because of white resistance. And the conservatives found new ways to organize in Texas. After having locked out Black and Latino voters and political aspirants and organizers for decades, the center and right wings of the Democratic Party begin actively recruiting Black and Latino candidates. So they do their own kind of conservative coalitions that are tokenistic, that aren't really speaking to the deeper economic needs of those communities. And generally, right, there's this backlash against civil rights, and that wasn't new, but after the 1960s, they gain steam, right? The court cases that create space for the civil rights movement are reversed. Give just one example, right? We all know about Brown versus Board opening up public schooling. We're here in Charlotte now, where the Mecklenburg case created busing as a solution, two-way busing as a solution to school inequality. But it was just a couple years after that the San Antonio versus Rodriguez case was decided that made it impossible to fund school districts, urban school districts, that said that the suburban districts could keep their own money and didn't have to share with anyone. So that encouraged more white flight and encouraged more resistance. So the civil rights movements hit a wall. And then internally within the coalition, that led to conflict. Sometimes it led to conflict between Black and Latinos, but more commonly it led to white liberals not knowing what to do with themselves and getting kind of scared and retreating. And so it's taken us a long time, I think, to rebuild from all.
Today, progressives struggle to make the case that a more just and democratic future is possible in Texas. Every few years, there seems to be a burst of enthusiasm. You're seeing that this year with like the U.S. Senate race. What do you think this history tells us about what's possible in a state like Texas?
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the reasons I dug into this in the first place, I think. And I think history offers a few really important lessons. One is that these struggles existed at all in the past, right? And that people did find ways of crossing racial lines, and resolving their differences by openly discussing them, right? By working together, recognizing that they were different and had different priorities, spoke different languages, lived in different neighborhoods, practiced different religions, what have you. But they found ways to nonetheless say, what are our collective goals that we can work on together? One way they did that was by people of relative privilege being able to understand how special attention needed to be paid to some of the most targeted members of their organizations or of their coalitions. So when the white liberals finally stopped talking about gradualism and began and embraced the push for immediate integration without compromise, suddenly they were able to build an alliance that was much deeper than anything they had attempted before. And I think that played out in the political arena as well, that when they tried to moderate their appeals to the electorate and do something that they viewed as electable or centrist or whatever, they found they didn't have anyone who wanted that. And so instead, when they ran to the left, when they organized all of the different bases of their potential coalition, people got enthusiastic and turned out and volunteered for them and donated and worked for them and voted for them. So both the social movements and the political organizing were at their most successful when they were most committed to a expansive vision of racial and economic justice. And I think by today's standards, of course we would add gender and sexual minorities and people with disabilities and other groups. we have now a new Jim Crow, right? That Michelle Alexander and many others have written about, right? Where a caste system that's rooted in the criminal legal system and the process of mass incarceration, the whole carceral state. We also have a new Juan Crow, and it's rooted in those same systems, but also in the immigrant detention system, the whole of the immigration system, and deciding who comes and who doesn't, the militarization of the border, all of these things. So I think if progressives want to make any progress in the United States today, and in the South included, white progressives need to be comfortable prioritizing issues like police brutality, like the mass incarceration, like immigration rights, like LGBT rights, and that if we do that, we're going to be able to again organize many bases and build a coalition that can produce power. And I think one reason the Democrats lose in the South and all over the country is that they never articulate an alternative vision like that.
Great. Well, that's been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, fantastic.